Welcome to the lesson. In the previous lesson we looked at participles and gerunds and how if we're not sure whether the word is a participle or a gerund, we remain ignorant of the true meaning of the sentence. And so it's very important that we understand whether we're using a participle or a gerund. We also looked at some forms which looked like a gerund but didn't use the possessive form of the noun, which was the subject of the gerund. And I want you to pay attention to number 3 to see what's going on there, because according to Fowler, who's the guy I read who criticised a lot of the use of participles and gerunds back in 1908, he really doesn't like number 3. He thinks that number 3, we need to get rid of number 3, although it's in common use. It really is used everywhere. But I hope to be able to show you why. Now, have a look at these 3 sentences which Fowler came up with. Women having the vote share political power with men. Now, the word having here is modifying women. It's women who have the vote that share political power with men. So here, having is a pure participle, and Fowler is happy with that. In number 2, women's having the vote reduces men's political power. Now here, having is a gerund, because this is the subject of reduces. It's having the vote which is the subject of reduces, which is why we use an S on the end, because it's singular. Having the vote is singular. And for Fowler, we must use this form. We must use it. And I think that actually, as subject, we very often do use the possessive form. It's when it's a gerund object that we very often don't use the possessive form, and it even sounds very, very formal and perhaps a little bit too formal for everyday speech. Nonetheless, Fowler likes it, and I can understand why. It makes it very clear whether we've got a gerund or a participle if we use this possessive form. It's clear that it's a gerund, and then that nicely conjugates that verb reduces. So women's having the vote reduces men's political power. And by the way, there's another reason why I like Fowler's number 2, and I can understand why he doesn't like number 3. Look at the parallelism. You've got men's in the possessive and you've got women's in the possessive on each side of the verb. And so the comparison is better from a parallel structure point of view. The parallel structure is there in number 2. And certainly it's a pure gerund in number 2, just like it's a pure participle in number 1. But if we come on to number 3, women having the vote reduces men's political power, Fowler doesn't like this, and he even calls it a fused participle, but you might call it a gerund participle hybrid, because it's somewhere in between of gerund and participle. Now, why do I say that? Well, it's not women who are the subject of this sentence. In sentence number 1, women was the subject of share, and that's why it didn't have an S, because it's a plural form. Women is plural, and so we don't say shares, we say share. But here we've got women and we've got reduces. And so firstly, that doesn't sound very good to say women reduces. Women clearly isn't the subject. But having the vote can't be subject, well, without women modifying, or having the vote modifying women. And if having the vote modifies women, we're back on number 1, and we really ought to have reduce. Women having the vote reduce. So for Fowler, this is incorrect. And I have to say, from a parallel structure point of view, it doesn't look so nice to me to say women and not women's. And so you can see why it seems to be half of a participle and half of a gerund. I hope you can see that it's somewhere in between a participle or a gerund. Nonetheless, this is exactly what we do use whenever we use verbs of perception and we have an object with a pronoun before it. For example, I didn't notice him laughing. We normally say him laughing and not his laughing. As an object, I think we nearly always use the non-possessive form, like in number 3. But Fowler didn't like it, and I can understand why. Now, one thing that Fowler didn't mind, but he certainly recognised, which is really important, is that there are a number of participles which are not participles, and they're not gerunds either. Have a look at these sentences: assuming, considering, seeing, speaking. Now, in all of them, I think that most students and most teachers, most English teachers, certainly I would have fallen into this trap a few months ago or a few years ago. These all look like a gerund or a participle, but let's have a look at their function. And the first thing to notice is that they cannot be participles if these sentences are correct, and they sound correct. Assuming this is true, the house will have to be demolished. Now, they can't be a participle because the subject of the main clause must be the same as the subject of this clause, and it's not the subject of this clause. It's not the subject of assuming. So it really can't be a participle. This would be a dangling modifier if it were a participle, but it's not. Considering the circumstances, the legislation will be brought in as soon as possible. Now, the legislation, which is the subject here, is not the subject of this smaller clause. So it's not a participle. Actually, all of these are being used as conjunctions. And if you look them up in Oxford Dictionary, which I always recommend, I mean dictionaries, not necessarily Oxford, but please use dictionaries, they're very useful. You will see, as I just have, I've just checked it just now, that seeing as is down in the Oxford Dictionary as a conjunction, which means the same as because or since. So really this is because it's illegal, we ought not to do it. And it's not a participle. The we is not the subject of this part, so it's not a dangling modifier. Okay, and even a sentence like speaking frankly, it can't just be a gerund, it can't just be a noun, because we wouldn't have noun, comma, he's unlikely to be on time. But we could have some kind of adverbial phrase here, and that's how it's being used as an adverbial phrase, an opening phrase like moreover, furthermore, speaking frankly, he's unlikely to be on time. It's not he that's speaking frankly, it's the author or narrator, but this is an adverbial phrase. So with certain words, and I'm afraid I haven't found a list of them yet, if anybody does know where I can find a list of words which look like a participle but are actually conjunctions, please do us all a favour and put it under the video, put the list under the video in the comments section, and that would be great. We could all have a nice list of these words which look like participles, they look like gerunds, but they are neither. And I thought I would mention this because Fowler mentions it, and he's right to do so, just in order to avoid confusion, because I've mentioned a few times now about dangling modifiers. Well, these could all be considered dangling modifiers if we assume incorrectly that they are participles. They're not participles, they're more like adverbial phrases or conjunctions. Okay, that's all I have on this for today, but we're going to go into more detail with participle phrases and commas in the next lesson. And if you have any questions or any comments about this topic, please put them under the video. It'll be interesting to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you all soon.